what do you perceive is the strategy of Netanyahu's government for West Bank now, apart from whatever is happening right now?
Netanyahu has long wanted to annex large swathes of the Palestinian West Bank, and which is illegal in international law. It's a war crime. But he pushed for this during the last Trump administration. The Oslo Accords categorized the West Bank into three main territories, A, B, and C. And the plan was in the 90s for the Israelis to withdraw from A, B, and C by 1997 and to turn them over to the Palestine Liberation Organization, which is the core of the Palestine Authority that was created by the Oslo Accords, and which has police and so forth. But only 40% of the West Bank was turned over to the PLO.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Middle East Insights, and I'm Dr. Shubhda Chaudhary. And today we are going to talk about a very, very enriching book, which is Gaza Yet Stands, which has been written by none other than Juan Cole. And I'm really very excited that we are having him as a speaker. As you all know, I don't have to, really introduce him to our audience internationally. But a brief introduction, which I'll do, is that Juan Cole is an American academic and a commentator on modern Middle East and South Asia. He is the Richard P. Mitchell Collegiate Professor of History at University of Michigan. And you should know where Michigan is, by the way. Since 2002, he has written a web blog called as Informed Comment. I would request all of you to follow it and keep following whatever he keeps on publishing on a daily basis. So, sir, my first question to you is, and I'm going to act as a devil's advocate. Why did you write the book Gaza Yet Stands?
Well, I had been commentating on Palestine and Gaza issues for the past 25 years, not only at my own site, Informed Comment, but also I was asked to write op-ed columns for magazines such as Salon and The Nation, Truth Dig. And so as the Gaza genocide unfolded in 2023 and 2024, I wanted to gather up some of those essays and add to them my commentary on the contemporary events of this year into a book. The Codex book is still unparalleled, despite we're having the internet now. But in order to find these old essays and put them in chronological order, it would be impossible on the internet. Whereas if you collect them in a book, you can read them chronologically. So I reached out to some publishers to see if anybody would publish it, but publishers are very chary of publishing anything that has already appeared. And this was an entire book of pieces that had already appeared and still are on the internet. And so I published it at Amazon myself and was somewhat amazed at how easy it was. And There's been some interest. We've had some sales of the book, and I'm pleased with having these essays in book form and available for people at this time of crisis.
Yeah. And one thing which I want to ask you is that you use the word genocide. And again, I'm being a devil's advocate. Where you are right now, especially you're going to have a new president. Um, how difficult is it for you to reach out to people, and how difficult for it as a journalist, as an academic, as a scholar, as a public intellectual, how difficult it is for you to use the word right now in US?
Well, I don't have any difficulty in using the word, and neither does Human Rights Watch or Amnesty International or many human rights organizations. The American Historical Association annual meeting in New York just passed a resolution against scholasticide, that they feel that the Israelis have destroyed all of the schools and universities in Gaza, and they felt as an academic organization they should speak out. So I think would I be allowed to publish an opinion piece in the New York Times in which I made a case for genocide? Maybe, maybe not. Would a Facebook posting that used the word with regard to Gaza and Israel be suppressed by the algorithm so that nobody sees it? Yes, that we know is the case. There are headwinds, and of course, there are many people in the United States who take umbrage at criticism of Israel, which is bizarre because Israel is a country, and we criticize Argentina and Serbia, and we criticize countries all the time. This kind of, there's a kind of question is, are you being critical of Israel? And it's a form of propaganda. It's a demand by partisans of Israel, of whatever background they might be, Christian Zionists or Jewish Zionists, or mainstream American liberals like Joe Biden. It's a demand that Israel be granted impunity. It's not a demand that I understand. I cannot understand why you would grant impunity to a country. We have spent a lot of effort and time since the end of World War II to try to make sure that World War II does not recur and that the horrors of World War II do not recur. And we've erected a latticework of international humanitarian law, which has often been incorporated into national legal systems by treaty. And granting impunity to Israel means undermining that entire edifice, which is one of the few tools we have in the contemporary world to fight back against the horrific human rights violations that are being conducted all over the world, in Sudan and Gaza and elsewhere.
That is true, sir, because in fact, what happened today is that Free Palestine TV, which has a Twitter X account and also had a YouTube account, their YouTube account was completely suspended. When they filed for an appeal, within 10 minutes, YouTube rejected the appeal. Now, I don't know how fair it is for YouTube creators to come to a decision within 10 minutes. And they said very clearly that we have reviewed your channel carefully and confirmed that it violates our community guidelines. We know that this is probably disappointing news, but it's our job to make sure that YouTube is a safe place for all. So that itself is very, it's a chutzpah, which is very, it's not even a facade anymore. And how do you brace yourself with Trump coming to the office on 20th of January? He has very clearly stated that his first and foremost insight is that the hostages should be released. At the same time, 2 days back, when a lot of Israeli protesters were protesting for the release of hostages, they were met with violence by their own country. So, how do you see the status quo changing? Was, as one calls it, genocidal Joe Biden better than what Trump will be?
It will be the same. The Biden administration's position on Israel is not different from Trump's position on Israel. The U.S. political establishment across the board, members of the National Security Council and the top Congress people and the executive, many in the courts, are committed to Israeli impunity. It's a project of American white nationalism and imperialism, and it's very threatening to people to have it challenged. Well, there's not any difference between on this issue. I don't say across the board, because the Democrats obviously have a very different domestic agenda. But on the question of Israel and Palestine, I don't expect any change. The position of Washington is that the Israelis should do whatever they want. And since the far right has come to power in Israel, the far right knows what it wants. It wants genocide.
And, sir, because in your book, Gaza Yet Stands, you have tried to chronologically enlist all your essays, analysis, opinion pieces over the past 15, 20 years that you have been researching on the area. Were there parallels or were there inklings that, say, 20 years before would have shown that something like this would happen?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, in 2010, when the WikiLeaks came out and U.S. diplomatic correspondence was leaked onto the web, there was a report which was picked up by a Norwegian newspaper that the Israeli High Command had developed plans for the complete destruction of Gaza. This is in 2010. And I blogged it when that notice came out. It was ignored by the mainstream media and by the academic establishment in the United States. But the Israelis apparently told the U.S. diplomats that the next time we have a lot of trouble with Gaza, we're simply going to level it. And so this is something that they developed plans to do 15 years ago.
At the same time, if this was a plan that was developed 15 years ago, and Hamas had been also, in a certain way, supported and propagated by Netanyahu himself as his own Frankenstein monster, because nothing, no kind of funding, be it from any Gulf country, can enter Gaza without Israel's approval. So, do you think that October 7, though we can never get it in evidence, but do you think that October 7 was known from before in terms of inference or intelligence by the Israeli administration?
No, there's some evidence that lower level Israeli troops, including some women who were stationed near the Gaza border, noticed unusual activity in the weeks before October 7th, training exercises and so forth of a suspicious nature. And they apparently attempted to pass their alarm up the command chain, but were not paid any attention to. No, the Netanyahu government believed that it had a deal with Hamas. And the deal was to prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state by keeping the PLO in the West Bank and Hamas in Gaza at daggers drawn. So it was a divide and rule strategy. And Netanyahu was willing to allow Hamas to have Gaza as a kind of fief, as a sphere of their own control, in return for the obstruction of Palestinian unity and the possibility of a Palestinian state emerging of the sort that was envisaged in the 1993 Oslo Accords. And as a result of this bargain, as you say, Netanyahu pleaded with Arab states, Qatar and Egypt principally, to send in vast amounts of money to Gaza, which everyone knew would end up in Hamas's coffers, at the same time that the Israelis kept a blockade on the Gaza economy. They wouldn't let in cement because it was dual purpose. They wouldn't let in a lot of essential building materials because they could be used for military purposes. But then they didn't want people to starve to death in front of the world's TV cameras, and they were wiser then than they are now. And so they let this aid money come in from Qatar and Egypt. And it appears to be the case that in 2017 or so, the Qatari government was at its was extremely frustrated with Hamas and had decided to end this relationship, to kick Hamas out of Qatar and to cease sending the money to Gaza. And that Netanyahu actually sent the head of Mossad, of the Israeli intelligence, to Doha to argue the Qataris back into continuing the arrangement. As you say, the money from Egypt and Qatar was deposited in Israeli accounts, and then it was the Netanyahu government that transferred it to Gaza. So Netanyahu was essentially bankrolling Hamas. The arrangement was imperfect. The Hamas, in order to retain credibility, felt that it had to be constantly attacking Israel. And so they developed these homemade rockets that they would send out into the desert. Every once in a while, they managed to hit something. They were unguided small rockets. Mostly, the thousands of them landed uselessly in the desert. But sometimes they did fall on people's homes or factories, and they did kill a few Israelis. But the Netanyahu government appears to have decided that this kind of drumbeat of harassment from Gaza was a price well worth paying for keeping the Palestinians divided and for keeping this deal going. So Netanyahu thought he had a deal with Hamas, and he was shocked and amazed on October 7th when the deal fell apart. And there is a question as, certainly Hamas changed its policies. It hadn't been conducting this kind of spectacular terrorism in the decade before October 7th. It had done terrorism. It had, sent agents over into Israel and blown things up and attacked the cafeteria at Hebrew University and killed students and things. But it was 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, that they were doing those things, and they had more or less ceased for a long time, and they depended more on the rocket attacks to make their statement. So there is a question as to why did the Hamas high command decide to kill over 1,100 Israelis on October 7th, and there's something almost ISIL-like, the terrorist organization Daesh or ISIL. Also engaged in these kinds of spectacles as terrorism. Why did Hamas do that? And it's not clear. It may be that they felt they were being sidelined permanently by the arrangement they had made with Netanyahu, and that it was unsustainable and that they needed to put themselves back on the map.
And when we talk about Hamas, the common perception, sir, is that Hamas is mostly organically, the militants are from Gaza, but they have also gained traction in West Bank over the past decade, along with other Palestinian organizations. The one thing which I never understood was when Haganah or Irgun were never considered as terrorist organization, and but Hamas and other Palestinian organizations are terrorist organizations. In the same way, like it's when a Muslim commits any kind of crime, it's completely Islamophobic and terrorism. But when a white man or a woman commits a crime, it's an isolated incident that is portrayed by the media. So my question to you is that what do you perceive is the strategy of Netanyahu's government for West Bank now, apart from whatever is happening right now?
Netanyahu has long wanted to annex large swathes of the Palestinian West Bank, and which is illegal in international law. It's a war crime. But he pushed for this during the last Trump administration. The Oslo Accords categorized the West Bank into three main territories, A, B, and C. And the plan was in the 90s for the Israelis to withdraw from A, B, and C by 1997, and to turn them over to the Palestine Liberation Organization, which is the core of the Palestine Authority that was created by the Oslo Accords, and which has police and so forth. But only 40% of the West Bank was turned over to the PLO. And the other 60%, Area C, is controlled by the Israeli military. It's under military occupation. And there are many Israelis, including Netanyahu, want to annex Area C. For one thing, that would give Israel a border with Jordan, or a bigger border with Jordan, and allow them to have bases right on that Jordanian border. So, and then they're land hungry. They want to send settlers in from Israel. Israel is now an expensive place to live, and many people are hungry to move to the West Bank because the housing is much more inexpensive, and the Israeli government actually will subsidize settlements, illegal settlements in the West Bank, illegal from the international point of view. So then in late 2022, Netanyahu crossed a red line. He wanted to form a government. He wanted to come back to power. And the only way he could do it was to bring on board the far right, the Israeli far right, the Israeli equivalent of neo-Nazis, the Jewish Power Organization, the religious Zionists. And that strain of Israeli politics is deeply committed to annexing the entire Palestinian West Bank. If they could, they would like to expel the Palestinians from it, and then settle it and make it Israel. And they are now in charge of it. The Palestinian West Bank is beholden to the Minister of Finance, Bezalel Smotrich, and the Minister of National Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir. And all you have to do is is Reed Haaretz, the English language version of the center-left Israeli newspaper, and read what they say. It's very clear. They want to annex the West Bank. And my guess is there isn't anything to stop them from doing that. The Biden administration tut-tutted whenever they talked like that, but didn't impose serious sanctions or do anything substantial to stop it. And I think Trump will let them do whatever they want. So we could well see an annexation of the West Bank in the next 4 years.
Yes, and so what you have also been writing about is something called as water apartheid in West Bank. Can you explain to our audience what exactly this water apartheid is when it comes to Palestine, Israel?
Well, water is very important in the Middle East, which is an arid zone. And I think it's hard for Americans or Indians to understand quite how perilous the situation is with regard to water. You know, the Jordan River, which is so famous and where Jesus was baptized, is a tiny little trickle now. And a lot of water is drawn off by the Israeli society. There are also underground aquifers, deposits of water which are refilled by rainfall, but they're being drawn down. They're overused, and you can make an aquifer run dry if you use it faster than the rainfall replenishes it. So on the West Bank, the Israeli state has very carefully directed the water resources to the Israeli squatter settlements. These are settlements that are covertly backed by Israel, which sends in these settlers and with bulldozers and equipment, and they make a housing complex, a big set of apartment buildings where Palestinians are not allowed to live. So it is an apartheid. And then they dig deep wells, deeper than the Palestinian wells. So when the aquifer level falls, the Palestinian wells go dry and the Israelis still have water. And the Israelis also direct water to the settlements from riverine sources and from desalinization plants. So the Palestinians have access to a fraction of the amount of water on a daily basis that the Israeli settlers do.
And when you try to investigate and write about all of this, what has been the level of surveillance on you by CIA and Mossad and IPEC and other?
I mean, Shobda, I think we're all in a world now where we're all under surveillance all the time.
Yeah.
That's what the internet is. If somebody's on Facebook, what is the purpose of Facebook but to surveil people and sell them things? But I'm not important. I don't think people are spending a lot of capital on me. And if anybody is following me around, they would get really bored really quickly because I mostly sit in a corner and read books. But certainly, I think there are ways of sidelining people and of making it difficult for certain voices to be heard. The YouTube algorithm
Yeah.
and the Facebook algorithm and so forth are impersonal ways of doing that. You can just set the algorithm to deprecate, to play down any mention of Palestine or Gaza. And of course, one of the problems with covering the Gaza genocide is that it's horrific. All these pictures are coming out of dead people. And unlike in the movies, when someone's blown up, there's not a whole body lying there. It's in bits and pieces. And that's something that no one likes to see. And so some Palestine activists feel a need to make these images available on social media. But most social media community standards disallow gore, disallow these kinds of bloody pictures. But if you don't show the bloody pictures, then how do you convey the horror of what has been happening in Gaza, where tens of thousands of people, of civilians, of these are not militants, the vast majority of them, nearly, well, something like 17,000 children have been killed, and not and their death hasn't been an easy one. It's been involved. They've been shot. They've been blown up. And so, how do you convey that horror if you're not allowed to show the pictures?
Yeah, it's completely. I mean, like even with us, for example, the algorithm of YouTube. When I put a lot of shorts, there's strikes that you get before they remove your channel completely. So YouTube has already given me one strike because I was posting every day about Gaza, and then I took a break that let's take a step back before, and then I thought that we should have a copy of all our podcasts before they do it, because they're going to do it anyway. Not today, but maybe 6 months from now. So a lot of activists are shifting to Blue Sky or Rumble. But at the same time, my question to you is that how about your own blog commentary? Have you noticed algorithm functioning against you for your own blog website?
Yes. Oh, it's not just me. Actually, the algorithm now deprecates news. They don't want news, so they downplay it. If you follow someone on Facebook or Threads or Instagram because you want news, they won't show them to you, even though you followed them. Our hits have been cut to an eighth what they were 3 years ago.
And this is happening over the period of past since 2023, 24.
It started even before 2022. Facebook decided to play down news, and then they decided to play down Palestine. So I have, I don't know, 100,000 followers on various social media. Almost none of them are actually being shown my postings anymore.
Yes, exactly. That's true, actually. Because unless I go on X or Twitter and type and follow you, like I follow you, but I'm not, your posts are not visible to me.
Yeah, no, they don't show them to you.
Yeah, unless I go and check out your profile, I will not see your posts.
Yeah, at Facebook, there are ways of going into your controls and telling them you want to see more of certain sites. But most people don't do that. And they don't realize if they follow someone that they're not going to see their postings. X, it's not just ideological. Elon Musk at X has decided not to show posts that have links in them, because he wants to create a walled garden at X that traps people inside. And ultimately, he wants it to become Amazon, and he wants to sell things to them and so forth. So a link takes you away from the site. So if you have a link in your posting at X, people don't see it as much.
Wow. Wow, that's another kind of, because he's trying to introduce something called as positive algorithm now, according to, and then Macron is saying that, Elon Musk is interfering with a lot of elections of different countries. And yes. He is, a lot of other communities are also talking about how they can boycott from Elon Musk, not just X. But the point of the matter is that over the period of time, the normalization of the genocide. Oh, every day, 10 Palestinians killed. Okay, 20 killed. Okay. The pediatrician, Dr. Abu Hassim, is missing from 27th of December. Okay. Children are hungry. There's a starvation, and babies are freezing to death. The entire of Gaza is flooded. People are living in tents. They don't have woolen clothes. Okay. I mean, the kind of apathy that has grown around us. How do you deal with that? And how does your book deal with that?
Well, let's face it, the major television media have demoted Gaza as a subject. So I don't know in India whether you see on NDTV or the other channels any reporting on Gaza. We certainly don't in the United States. You could watch CNN or MSNBC, these major news cable channels, all day, every day, and Gaza would barely be mentioned. There would be almost never any mention of it, and certainly no footage, no coverage. You have to go to Al Jazeera, which is based in Qatar, to get news, and or TRT World,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Turkish channel will cover it. But the major media in the United States, and I don't mean the print media because newspapers still do cover it, but the major mass media, television, cable news, and so forth, uh, it's not a subject for them. They have deprecated it, and these are national media, people check in on them time to time. They do provoke a lot of national conversations. If they consistently don't cover a subject, then it becomes not a subject. And it's not just Gaza, of course, but I mean, that's a major example. But we have a massive genocide happening in the Sudan. There's no coverage of it in international mass media. You wouldn't know Sudan existed. I mean, 14 million people are on the verge of starving to death. It's a one of the worst situations we've seen since the end of World War II, and it's not being covered either. So these major television media, the corporate bosses, decide that some subjects are not going to be covered.
And at a personal level, sir, I want to ask a question which is very visceral, that how do you deal with your anger or humiliation when British Israeli professors, I would not name any, but they say that you hardly have done any independent research on 20th century Middle East, and your analysis is derivative, and whatever you are criticizing of the Israeli lobby, it is anti-Semitic, and everything is anti-Semitic today, you know. So how do you deal with the visceral anger and humiliation that is often also met to academics who are trying to speak truth to power?
Yes, obviously there are active campaigns. In this United States, we have several organizations that target academics who speak out and attempt to smear them. Uh, and uh, and I think especially for younger academics, people without tenure, who are not well positioned yet, this is very threatening, and they feel it deeply. Um, I have to say, it's not something that ever affected me in my own university or my own situation. I I think, you just have to do your work. And if anybody wants to read my books and check the footnotes, I think they'll find that I've done the research. I've used the archives and so forth. But uh, and as for calling me a racist, there's no good reply to that, Shobda. If someone calls you a racist, there's nothing you can say to it.
Yeah.
what are you going to say? My best friends are X. Replying to it makes you ridiculous. So I think you just have to live your life in a way that the charge seems ridiculous to people who actually know you. And so I don't personally. I have a thick skin. I lived when I was young, in my early 20s, I lived in Beirut for a while, and the Civil War broke out while I was there. I got a job working for a newspaper while the Civil War was going on. So it was very disturbing. I think I still have a little bit of post-traumatic syndrome because of it. The Syrian army came into Lebanon, and they had something called well, it was a form of artillery where the artillery bore was rifled. It's not usually the case, but it gives it more precision. And every time one of these artillery pieces went off, it was like an earthquake. It would shake the ground, and you could feel it in your apartment. And you got this real fear in the pit of your stomach that, what if the shell hits your building? So I lived for about a year under those circumstances. And in the aftermath, I think it helped with, flame wars on the internet, because if someone's not actually firing a shell at me, I really don't care if they want to criticize me or
Thank you
attempt
so
to smear
much.
me.
Thank you so much. It is, I asked this personally for my own guidance because that's what the similar kind of perspective often I also come across. And then I was like, what kind of binary is this? You know, and who decides what is scholarly and who doesn't, and the hierarchy and the kind of specifically with South Asian scholars, with women in academia, all of that, like who decides all of that. So at the same time, sir, when we're talking about Syria, and also when you talk about Lebanon and the civil war, one of the books that really made me fall in love with this region was Rabi Alameddin's book, The Unnecessary Woman. And I have read it like 10 times. And I really, really love Rabi Alameddin's work. And it talks about, even though it's a fictional character, but it talks about the real dangers of the civil war in a language that is very understandable and consumable for us. And now that we're talking about Syria, sir, how do you, what do you think? What is happening in Syria? Who is Jolani? What is HTS? They're talking with all the Gulf leaders. France and Germany are like the foreign ministers are coming to Damascus. They are going to Sadnaya prison. Assad is, I don't know if it's true, but it's propaganda or hyper reality. Assad is trying to be assassinated through a poisoning attempt. He survives. Meanwhile, Israel continues, the Israeli state continues to take over 40% of Jordan's water capacity and taking over the buffer zone and going through Quneitra, Dera, and very close to Damascus. Gilani has not made any comment against them. What do you think is happening in Syria right now?
Well, the HTS is a very far-right Muslim radical movement that in the past was an affiliate of Al-Qaeda. So when those guys talked about Ayman al-Zawahiri or Osama bin Laden, these mass murderers who blew up New York and Washington, D.C., they would call them Sheikh now. They would give them honorifics and respect and so forth. That's how they were in 2015. And they attracted some patronage from Turkey and Qatar in particular, who in turn put pressure on them to dissociate themselves from Al-Qaeda. And then they ended up running this province in northern Syria of Idlib, where refugees from the al-Assad regime took refuge. So when they were running Idlib, they had to moderate their radicalism to some extent. They had non-Sunni subjects like Druze up there, and uh, many Syrians were brought up under the Ba'ath Nationalist Party, which is a form of nationalist socialism and relatively secular in its emphases. A lot of Syrians are not particularly religious. Uh, I can remember I visited Damascus one time, and when I was young, and I was hanging around with students, and we got to talking about what we wanted to do in the future and our regrets so far. And one of the young men said, "Well, I really think I should pray." So he was Muslim, but he wasn't saying his 5 daily prayers. He wasn't saying any prayers at all. I think there are a lot of Syrians like that. HTS is hardline and the kind of organization which doesn't deal well with people not practicing the religion. And there will be an attempt to impose this kind of fundamentalism by HTS on the rest of Syria, which I think is going to be a very difficult task because 35% of Syrians are some kind of minority. They're Christians and they're Shiites and they're leftist Kurds. And then, a large number of urban Syrians are secular minded and they're not particularly religiously oriented. But because of guns and HTS behind the scenes probably has gotten a lot of money from the Gulf in particular. They were able to take over the country. And so, it's a little bit like the Taliban taking back over Afghanistan. It's not quite to that extent because HTS has certain constraints in how it behaves from its sponsors, and then it wants to get the sanctions on the old Syrian government removed. But the United States and Europe are tying the removal of sanctions to their behavior in office. So were they to conduct a massacre of the Druze minority, or were they to take a very radical stand on women's rights, I think that they would face difficulties of an economic sort. So they're much more beholden to the West than the Taliban are. But with regard to Israel, the situation is complex because the Israelis had mixed feelings about the al-Assad government. They did see it as an enemy. The question is, was it an enemy that they preferred to other enemies? And when the Arab Spring youth revolt broke out in 2011, and then very quickly devolved into a civil war, basically between rural Sunnis and the Shiite-dominated, Alawite-dominated government of al-Assad, which had this Ba'ath nationalist socialist ideological framework. The Israelis gave some support to HTS in its then incarnation. It was called the Succor Front or Jabhat al-Nusra. And the Jabhat al-Nusra was fighting Hezbollah, which had come into Syria from Lebanon and it was a part of Iran's axis of resistance and was supporting the al-Assad regime. And the Israelis were very afraid of Hezbollah and certainly didn't want it, say, getting a base on the Golan Heights in Syria from which it could shell Israel. So because the Sunni hardline fundamentalists were fighting the Shiite hardline fundamentalists, the Israelis swung around and gave some support to the Al-Qaeda-linked faction. In fact, there are reports of wounded fighters from Jabhat al-Nusra being taken into Israel for treatment. And And the Druze in Israel didn't like the hardline Sunni fundamentalists. The Druze are an offshoot of Ismaili Shiism. And we're afraid of them. And the Druze in southern Syria and the Druze in Israel have relations with one another. So they actually lobbied the Netanyahu government to stop giving support to the predecessor of HTS. But there are HTS fighters who owe their lives to Israeli physicians.
Yeah.
So there's a reason for which Ahmad al-Shara, Abu Muhammad al-Julani was his nom de guerre, who is the leader of HTS, the reasons for which he has a complex set of relations with Israel and owes them some things. So he can't possibly be happy that the Israelis have taken Syrian territory, or as you say, occupied a dam which supplies a lot of water both to Syria and Jordan. But he doesn't seem to feel he's in a position to push back very hard against that at the moment. And again, the likelihood is that the Biden administration is holding out a carrot for him, that if he will recognize Israel, they will take off the sanctions. And I say this because they did this to Sudan. When the Sudanese had their people's revolution against Omar al-Bashir and overthrew him, the new civilian politicians for a while tried to cohabit with the officer corps. And Antony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, came to Abdel Fattah Burhan, and the general, and said, we'll take the sanctions off of Sudan that had been there because of al-Bashir, who was a war criminal and had warrants against him by the International Criminal Court, if you recognize Israel. And so Bashir did. I mean, Burhan did. And so I think the same thing will be tried with Syria, is to use the sanctions as a wedge to get Israeli recognition. And then if Shara will recognize Israel, he can also come to Washington and try to get Washington to put pressure on Israel to draw back a bit. But I don't think that the Israelis are going to give up everything that they've taken from Syria.
Yeah, that's one of the very few or rare or only, I don't know, countries in the world which has no borders, fixed borders. So I don't think so they are giving up on the territory, that especially Mount Hermon and the location of it, which gives a higher surveillance point over all of Syria. So I don't think so it's going away. And things are only going to get worse from 20th of January, because Trump he has made ridiculous attempts and remarks even at India. So things are only going to get worse. And my last question to you, sir, is that even though the algorithm is beating us down too, but my last question to you is that your book, Gaza Yet Stands, could you please tell us a couple of reasons that why should those who are not well acquainted with the conflict, like say scholars who are 20 years of age, or I'm not patronizing but just giving a generalization, those who are entering into the field or understanding it, or those who come from the world where they have not seen that kind of conflict, why should they read your book?
Well, I'm a historian, so historians think that you can't understand the present without understanding the past. And while this is the recent past, it is the case that I love journalism, journalists. I was a journalist, and I don't mean to slam them, but the conditions under which they work and the genre in which they publish plays down the past. If you read a typical newspaper article, it's what happened the past 24 hours. And they may put some explanations at the far end of the article. But in order to understand an event like October 7th and its aftermath, we can't start on October 7th. We have to start way before. And my book begins with the 2006 electoral victory of Hamas in the elections that were sponsored by the Bush administration, by the United States, for the Palestine Authority. And it was in that election that Hamas won Gaza. By the way, it barely won it. It was 51-49. Not only are there some adherents of Hamas in Palestinian West Bank, but there are many supporters of the PLO in Gaza. So from 2006, when Hamas came to power in Gaza, is the story that I tell of how things developed, how the Israelis put economic sanctions on Gaza, how they divided the Palestine Authority between Gaza and the West Bank, their policies towards Hamas. And there have been many episodes, as in when a flotilla of aid ships tried to come from Turkey to succor the people in Gaza, and the Israelis attacked these ships on international waters, which is quite illegal. So the pitch for the book is that it helps us to understand why we're where we are, how things developed in this way. But also, since it's short opinion pieces from these magazines like Salon and The Nation, or blog entries that have been curated, I would argue that for somebody who's 20, the pill goes down easily. It's not a dense piece of exposition. It's op-eds, and I often have colleagues tell me that they assign essays from my blog in their classes precisely because nowadays undergraduates are used to reading short pieces on the web. And there's that. Now they have a saying, TLDR, too long, didn't read. What they mean by that is if they're on social media and they saw an article that looks interesting and maybe they just read the first paragraph, they want to recommend it to their friends, but they want to be honest. And so they'll say, well, this looks interesting, but TLDR is too long, didn't read. So if they feel that way about essays on the internet, I worry about them reading books. But in any case, this one is not TLDR.
Wow. Thank you so much, sir. I am really very, very thankful for the privilege of your time. And above all, your entire life has been something which I try to emulate in mine, which is about speaking truth to power, not because you're trying to not fit into a box of labels and geographies and predictions. And that challenge of how you have been in your own life, tried to be shut down, cancelled, and cornered, has not kept you away from actually doing better today than what you did yesterday. And for scholars like me, that is a very empowering thought, because it makes me feel that if you can do it, then I can do it too. And that gives a lot of strength. So thank you so much, sir. And do let me know the next time you're in India.
Thank you so much. Bahut dhanyavad.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone who was up late night. And I will edit and put it on the YouTube. Thank you for the privilege of your time. And